Okay, so we've talked about this whole cycle of religious life and how hard it is to make the adaptation. 85% really have a hard time getting through it, and the big difference between change and transformation. It's a very big difference. So this is a quote from Omerku, can never pronounce his name well. Refounding is the work of divine initiative. We do not refound our orders and congregations, God does. And God needs a little help. So it's not about sort of, okay, well, let's just see what happens and we'll trust in God. And for me, it's more than that. And yet, at the same time, it really is so important, I think, to embrace this work as a faith journey, not just a matter of organizational change. It really is at the core of it. So for me, it's about cooperating with grace. And I'd like to read you another little poem. This is by William Stafford. Have you ever heard this poem? The Way It Is? Okay, here it goes. There is a thread you follow. It's among things that change. But it doesn't change. People wonder about what you are pursuing. You have to explain about the thread. But it's hard for others to see. While you hold it, you can't get lost. Tragedies happen, people get hurt or die, and you suffer and get old. Nothing you can do can stop time's unfolding. You don't ever let go of the thread. Okay, well, the beauty of poetry is you can put your own stuff there. So don't ever let go of the thread. God's call, or for me, it has the notion of holding on, never running ahead of grace, never lagging behind, but listening to God's call and trying to follow that. And it's there all of our life. And so how do we hold on to that? So for me, this journey of transformation, at its essence, is about a cooperation with grace. It's discerning God's call to choose life. What does that mean to you? What does new life mean to you? Is it just new members? What's new life mean in this congregation for you? It's an act of creative fidelity for sure, because you have your fundamental principles, you have your core documents, you have your charism, whatever that is today really for you. How do you remain faithful to that and live into tomorrow? How do you put that together with a new alignment? So for me, this stuff is very much about the entering of the dark night, going through the muck and the mire of what's inherent in transformation. It's living the Paschal mystery with faith, hope, and liberating love. That's what this is for me. So now I'll give you the theory, okay? But really, this is the heart of it. This is the heart of it. The theory for me stems from a lot of my work as a psychotherapist, my own personal journey in life, and all these people have great things to say. Okay, so in looking at the literature and looking at my own life and working with religious communities and religious individually and psychotherapy, what happens when somebody's going through a conversion process? What is going on? How does that happen? How, when they are cooperating with grace, what does cooperation look like? How do they do that? Well, it could be a great big mystery. This Paschal mystery is a mystery. But for me, it's a mystery we know by faith. We've all been through these transformations in life. So while it's a mystery, it's not a total blank slate, okay? You're familiar with how you've journeyed through some very difficult transitions in your life, and when you've been transformed and when you've not. So I'd like you to at least jot down for now, we're going to come to these this afternoon, or at least mentally note them. I'm not going to give you a lot of time here. Just think about transformative experiences in your own life, times that when you've met your own crossroads. Just jot a headline or a note to yourself mentally or on a piece of paper. I'm not going to share these just yet. And reflect upon your own community's crossroads, not only where you are today, but maybe where you've been in the past. I'll just give you a minute to do that. Okay, we will return to whatever note-taking you did just now this afternoon, but for now I want you to mentally hold on to these crossroads that you're thinking of as I walk through what I think is involved in the work of transformation, because as you think of it in your own terms, it might make more sense for you. So these are, for me, what I would call the 5 dynamics of transformation, the work of cooperating with grace, with faith, hope, and love. When we go through a transformation in life, and it's real, and we've come out the other end differently, something has happened to our understanding of our own narrative in life. We shift the narrative. Think about when you, if this is the one you jotted down, joined religious life. It shifted your way of thinking about meaning and purpose and God and relationships and service and so many other things. It was, you ended up in a different worldview in your understanding of life than you had previously. You broke open and broke into something new. So one thing that is involved in this journey of transformation is the shift in consciousness. Another is the strengthening or the returning home to the core of who you are, your soul, your true self, your inner voice, whatever you might want to call that. The work of reconciliation and healing. Because when we're broken, what do we need to put back together again? How do we need to heal or reconcile or bridge whatever woundedness exists? We need to experiment and to learn and try new things, because you can't become new unless you try new things. And that means failing a lot. And you need to look at a new way of addressing the deeper longings in your life. So for me, these are the 5 elements, and let me walk through each one of these. Transformation of consciousness. I need a new word because it's too jargony. Okay, it's this big thing about the shift in consciousness. So let me try to concretize that. You've heard this before, I'm sure. You can't solve a problem with the same mindset that created Albert Einstein. It's just inevitable. It's like that nine dots that you tried to connect. You've got to shift your perspective. It doesn't work in the same way you try to think of boxes and dots. So here's another example of that. What do you see here? 2 faces? What else do you see? A cup, a chalice. Okay. Does everybody see both those? But initially you see one thing. You have to sort of twist your mind around getting it a different way. What do you see there? A bird rather. What else? A rabbit. Does everybody see both those? Here's the rabbit. Here's the rabbit's mouth, eyes, and ears. Yeah. Now I get it. It's like math. Once you get it, it's easy. Okay. Now what do you see? An old lady. What? A young lady. Now, this is more like a Rorschach test. You see the young lady? Does everybody see both? Here's the young lady. There's her nose and her eyelash. This profile of her face and her hair. Transformation of consciousness. Shift in perspective. A different way of viewing things. If you are to transform your congregation, you need to look at it differently. You need to see it differently. It's a paradigm shift. It's a paradigm shift. What's a paradigm shift? The church doesn't have a mission, the mission has a church. Who said that recently? Who? Pope Francis? Tony Gittins? Who's the other guy? Devins? That you were talking about the other day? Steve Devins? Okay, it's a shift. It's a shift in mindset to think that, because communities used to think it's our mission. No, it's God's mission. Okay? The church doesn't have a mission. The mission has a church. The community doesn't have a charism. A charism has the community. It's not your charism. You resonate around that charism, hopefully. And my hunch is there are other people outside of your congregation who also resonate around this charism. If this charism has a chance of living into the future, you've got to give it its best shot and make it real, okay? You don't have a soul, you are a soul, you have a body. Who said that? Thomas Aquinas? Did he say that too? C.S. Lewis said it as well, okay? It's just a different way of thinking, and that kind of shift is what we're trying to accomplish in this work of transformation. Who said these things? Who said that? Jesus said that, okay. So he upset everything, he upset the whole apple cart. A different paradigm, a different way of thinking. Vatican II is a different paradigm, a different way of thinking. Everybody's working at looking at the vows differently, putting this notion of evolutionary consciousness, Ilia Deo, and all those people who are looking at a bigger picture of religious life, and Pope Francis to wake up the world. These are all shifts in consciousness. It's the kind of thing that a religious community, in my experience, or personally, in my experience, when there's a breakthrough, a transformation, something has clicked differently. And it creates the opportunity to write a new narrative for your life. So that's number one. Number two, reauthentication of your soul, your inner voice, the truth of who you are, personally, okay, and collectively. Can you be real with one another? Are you living in alignment with your soul? We talked about the gap earlier. Does your life really reflect what you have in your core documents about your charism? Do your core documents represent really the charism that lives in each of you? So what is the authentic inner life of this congregation? Besides all the words, what's really real here? And can you get real with one another? Or is it uneasy for you to be that intimate with one another? For you to do the work of transformation, it is the work of getting quite intimate with one another. Because you don't want to build a house of cards. You don't want to say, okay, this is who we are, what we're going to do, here's the plan. When half of you are thinking, that's crazy, that's nuts, I don't even believe in this. Can you get honest? Can you get real? Can you go to the core of who you are? Because that's what it's going to take to do this work of transformation. I like the way it's said by Theodore Rothke. What is madness but nobility of the soul at odds with circumstance? The day is on fire, and I know the purity of pure despair. That's what I shared this morning. My life was totally out of whack, out of sync, unaligned with who I was inside. Ever been there? Ever done that? It is madness. It is madness. Thomas More, who wrote Care of the Soul, says this: there is nothing neutral about the soul. It is the seat and the source of life. Either we respond to what the soul presents in all of its fantasies and desires, or we suffer from this neglect of ourselves. Same kind of thing. Can you listen to what's inside? Can you share that with one another? Can you become one congregation at a soul level? Because if you're not, if you're just up here and you're doing strategic planning or you're skirting things around the surface, it's not going to happen. So, okay, that's two. This is number three, conversion and reconciliation. This is really what I call a crucible. It's really the toughest work for any group. Most groups really struggle with beginning to do the effort to reach across their differences and to talk through some of their anger or hurts or wounds or pain, which is just part of the human condition. But if you're going to do this work of transformation, you can't just override that material. That really, for me, is the heart of it, and it's really the hard work. It's what Parker Palmer is referring to as the tragic gap. How do you get groups to wrangle and struggle and stay in the struggle together? This is so important. So it's the interpersonal work, it's the tending to what I call the garden. The garden for me is a metaphor for a life in community. Okay, so let's say you come to a new community, looks pretty warm and hospitable, has a banana tree out front, so we know it's hospitable. Okay, and it starts fine, okay, but one day Bob said something and ticked me off, or I felt really pretty misunderstood or put down or dismissed. Do we talk about that? Do I snap back? Do I just walk away? Do I just keep him at arm's distance? Do we work with those kind of ordinary conditions or not? We can start and create a nice garden, but if you don't have fences, all the critters come in and mess it up. If you don't water it, if you don't do the ordinary chore of trust tending, trust is not a noun, it's a verb, it's an activity. We've got to go to one another and repair trust when we break it. It's never good and stays there. I trust my wife more than anybody in the whole world. Not every day. Not all the time. And when we've screwed up, messed up, or we've gone in different directions and stepped on one another's toes, whose responsibility is it to fix it? Both. When you screwed up, messed up in community, whose responsibility is to fix it? Edward's. This is what happens in a lot of communities. I don't know if it's true for yours. Either that person waits the other person out. You know, I was the one who's injured, not me. I didn't do it. So we wait the other person out, we turn the cold shoulder, or we take it to leadership. And we start triangulating one another, gossiping about one another, or we plop it in leadership's lap and let them fix it or not. So anyway, this is really hard work to do. My wife has this phrase when we train groups. She says, the essence of affirmation is loving confrontation. Well, there's a paradigm shift. The essence of affirmation is loving confrontation. Think of your best friends, if you have them, soulmates, and how you were able to go through this kind of mess together. Well, that's a loving relationship. People who you know and trust, they're going to stay at the table with you. Nobody's going to walk away. And we're going to get through this together. Wow. That's a pretty gem of a relationship if you've cut that. Ronald Rolheiser says it this way. To say I don't have to deal with this goes against the teaching of Christ, because this, meaning conflicts and mess, is precisely what he was referring to when he said, unless you eat my flesh, you cannot have life within you. Jesus is clear. We cannot bypass a flawed family on earth to try to relate to a non-flawed God in heaven. Community is a non-negotiable element with the spiritual quest, precisely because we are Christians, not simply theists. So he's saying we can pray all day long and we can honor this great God, but if we're not really living this stuff, how real is that? How real is our own spirituality? So that's a challenge. So that's that third piece. The fourth piece is experimentation and learning, the willingness to try something new, to become a learning community together. Have you ever read Richard Rohr's book, Following Upward? No? I put it on the reading list. It's a great book. I like Richard Rohr. I think he writes beautiful stuff, but this is one of my favorites as well, because he's talking about how we just have to mess up. We have to mess up to learn. We have to deal with our sinfulness, accept that as part of us, and keep on growing and learning. The first half of life, we sort of put it all together, then it all falls apart, and we got to re-put it together again. That's what he talks about. So it's a wonderful book to normalize the experience of failure in life. And groups that try something new will fail. It's guaranteed. There's no sanitized way through this. If you try some new things, whatever that thing, maybe it's that international community that you're talking about, believe me, you're going to mess it up. One group I was with, they wanted to create something of an intentional community to try to do this kind of work together, and 2 months into the gate, it fell apart. And the blame and the blame and the blame was all over the place. You know, we've got to get to a point where you can say, oh, okay, that didn't work. What can we learn from this? And I know it's real and people's feelings are hurt, etc. We've got to look at how do you keep going, keep trying, keep experimenting. This book, Being Wrong, by Catherine Schultz, she starts her preface with being right is one of the sweetest feelings in the whole world. And she goes on and on about how it's better than chocolates and all sorts of other things. And how we hate being wrong. She spends the whole book talking about how important that is. Same kind of vein, but not a theologian speaking to that, or a spiritual man. At any rate, this notion of experimentation and learning is crucial. You talked about acting out this morning, John, acting up. I think that's the way we grow sometimes. Sometimes we get an insight and that leads us, and therefore we do such and such. But a lot of times we're just groping and intuiting our way into a new way of being, and we act it out before we realize what is even drawing us or pushing us in that way. So acting your way into a new way of being is critical. You need to take action. Several of you were speaking this morning about your greatest fear or apprehension is that this will be a lot of words and you won't do anything. Well, you've got good reason to be afraid of that, because it could easily be that if you choose to do that. So action is critical. To not be stuck. You've heard the phrase paralysis by analysis. Okay, it's easier to keep talking about things than actually go out and do something. So becoming a learning community where you can grow together is a huge challenge and a very important part of this. How can you grow and learn together as a congregation, not just individually? Teilhard de Chardin says it this way: for our lives to be meaningful, they must succeed in continuing the creative act of evolution. I love Teilhard de Chardin's notion of, he's got a lot of notions that I like, but the collective, quote, noosphere, the sense of we are becoming one global mind and heart. And he said that in the 40s, before there was an internet where it actually happens, or before Pope Francis spoke to the same thing. Okay? We're becoming a global community. How can you, as a religious congregation, be part of this evolutionary movement? How can you contribute to the evolution of humanity through your own growth and efforts to evolve as a congregation? Okay, that's a lot of stuff, okay? And we're going to spend the rest of the time trying to unpack and make sense of it. But these are the 5 things. Oops, I forgot the last one. Visioning. Transformative visioning. We make a path by walking. You've probably heard that many times these days, because many communities are knowing that what this is, this work of transformation, isn't a 7-point program. We can't create a roadmap for this necessarily. We've got stretch goals and immediate goals, but we don't know exactly how this is going to unfold. So it's finding the next best step, one step at a time, starting with and continuing to work with your deepest longings and your greatest aspirations. If it gets too cerebral, as somebody put it today, you're building a house of cards. So how do you keep it as a matter of your deepest longings? One last quote from Rilke. You must give birth to your images. They are the future waiting to be born. Fear not the strangeness you feel. The future must enter in you long before it happens. Just wait for the birth and the hour of new clarity. I think that rings so true to me in this kind of work. The future is already in you. It's already happening. It's about you cooperating with grace and participating in its unfolding. So that's that.